Ex-husband mocked the ex-wife during the investor luncheon until an encrypted letter exposed his secret ties. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main characters. Chloe Anderson sat quietly at the large conference table, her eyes scanning the room of potential investors. The sound of murmuring voices and the occasional clinking of coffee cups filled the air as the gathering unfolded. It wasn't long before her ex-husband, Matthew Anderson, made his grand entrance. Matthew, tall and imposing, had always commanded attention, but today, his presence felt like an unsettling storm on the horizon. As the head of Anderson Group, he carried the weight of years of success, but Chloe knew him better than anyone. She knew the hidden secrets behind that confident smile. Chloe and Matthew had shared a history full of highs and lows, but after their divorce, the stakes had changed. No longer bound by marriage, they now found themselves on opposing sides of a new battle. And today, at this luncheon, things were about to take an unexpected turn. Matthew took his seat at the head of the table, flashing a smile that Chloe knew all too well. The investors were paying close attention, but Chloe's focus was entirely on him. It was as if time had stopped, and the tension between them grew thicker with every passing second. He wasted no time in taking jabs at her, making sly comments that were meant to undermine her presence in the room. "It's good to see you've made it, Chloe. I wasn't sure if you'd find the time between running your nonprofit and handling your other responsibilities," Matthew remarked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The room fell silent for a moment, as if everyone sensed the unspoken history between them. Chloe's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure, knowing better than to react to his taunts. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Matthew's brashness, and the power dynamic between them was evident. Chloe had learned to play the game, and she wasn't about to let him derail her reputation, not in front of the investors. She took a deep breath, her mind working quickly to recalibrate the situation. She knew that Matthew's public mocking wasn't just for entertainment. It was meant to distract, to destabilize her in front of their audience. But Chloe wasn't the same woman he had married. No, she was smarter, stronger, and more focused than ever. But as she prepared herself to speak, her thoughts were interrupted by the sudden arrival of a letter that would change everything. A seemingly inconspicuous envelope, hand-delivered by one of the assistants, was placed before her. Chloe glanced down at the letter, its wax seal unbroken. There was something about the envelope that felt oddly important, almost like a signal from the universe. She took a moment before opening it, the room's chatter continuing in the background. The contents were unexpected, a string of encrypted words. Chloe's heart skipped a beat. What could this mean? She glanced up, her eyes narrowing as she processed the information. This letter, this cryptic message, was about to expose a secret that Matthew had spent years trying to bury. Chloe's heart raced as she carefully examined the encrypted letter in her hands. The room around her seemed to blur into the background as her mind tried to make sense of the cryptic message. Matthew, oblivious to the storm brewing in front of him, continued his casual mockery, his voice cutting through the air like a sharp knife. His words were a distraction, but Chloe's focus remained on the letter. She knew it wasn't just some random note, it had to be connected to the secret Matthew was desperately trying to keep hidden. Chloe's fingers trembled slightly as she turned the envelope over, her mind racing with possibilities. She glanced at Matthew once more, his confident demeanor as impenetrable as ever. But Chloe had seen through that mask before. She knew exactly how to read him, how to find the cracks in his carefully constructed facade. Chloe slid her finger under the wax seal and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a series of numbers and letters arranged in a pattern that made no immediate sense. It was encrypted, and Chloe knew that deciphering it wouldn't be easy. But she also knew that it was her only chance to get the truth. With a deep breath, she slipped the paper into her bag and pushed the thoughts of the letter to the back of her mind, for now. She had to maintain her composure. The investors were still watching, waiting for the next move in this high-stakes game. "So, Chloe," Matthew said, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the power he wielded in this situation. "How are things going with your new venture?" Chloe's eyes narrowed, the tension between them palpable. She was no longer the same woman he had once known. The years of marriage and divorce had taught her how to hold her ground, how to rise above his attempts to break her. "It's going well," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "I'm just focused on doing what's right, as always." Matthew's smile faltered for a split second, but he quickly recovered. He was trying to provoke her, to make her react, but Chloe wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. As the conversation continued, Chloe's thoughts remained on the encrypted letter. She could feel the weight of the secrets it held pressing on her mind, but she knew that now wasn't the time to act. She needed to gather more information, to figure out who had sent the letter and why it was meant for her. She could only guess that it had something to do with the deals Matthew had been making behind closed doors, deals that could potentially destroy everything he had built. The luncheon went on, but Chloe's attention drifted. She knew that, no matter how charming Matthew tried to appear, the truth was just waiting to be uncovered. The encrypted letter was a key, and Chloe was determined to unlock it. After the luncheon, Chloe made her way to her car, the weight of the letter still pressing heavily on her mind. She knew she had to act fast. Matthew would be looking for any opportunity to cover his tracks, and Chloe couldn't afford to wait any longer. As she sat behind the wheel, she pulled out her phone and quickly started researching methods to crack the encryption. It was going to take time, but she had no choice. The truth was out there, and Chloe was ready to find it, no matter what it took. Chloe sat in her car, the engine idling as the steady hum filled the silence. Her eyes were glued to the phone screen, her fingers quickly typing in search queries to crack the encrypted letter she had received earlier. The weight of the situation pressed down on her. She had been through a lot in her life, betrayals, broken trust, and the collapse of her marriage, but this was different. This was bigger. She could feel the gravity of the secret Matthew was hiding, and she knew that unlocking it was the only way to take back control. The encrypted message on the paper she had found earlier was more than just a few random letters and numbers. It was a key to something larger, something Matthew had worked too hard to keep buried. Chloe was determined to find out what it was. Her fingers moved faster as she dug deeper, scanning through websites, tutorials, and software that might help her decipher the code. The task was complex, but Chloe wasn't one to back down from a challenge. She had learned the hard way how to survive in a world full of secrets, and now, she was using every ounce of that knowledge to unlock the truth. Her mind was racing as she tried different algorithms and approaches, but the letters and numbers on the page were stubborn, refusing to reveal their meaning. It was frustrating, but Chloe didn't give up. After what felt like hours of trial and error, she finally found something that worked. The code began to unravel, one letter at a time. She could feel her pulse quicken as the message started to take shape. The words were coming together, revealing a connection that sent a chill down her spine. This wasn't just about Matthew's personal life, it was about the deals he had been making, the ones that could jeopardize everything they had built together. Chloe stared at the screen, her mind reeling as the full extent of Matthew's betrayal became clear. The encrypted letter had exposed his involvement with a powerful, shadowy organization, one with ties to illegal activities. It was no longer just a matter of personal vendettas or old wounds. This was something far more dangerous, something that could destroy them both. Chloe's first instinct was to confront him, to storm into his office and demand answers. But she knew that would be a mistake. Matthew was clever, too clever to fall for something so obvious. No, she needed to play this carefully. She had to be strategic. Chloe made a decision then and there. She would gather more evidence, more details, and she would use it to take him down, not just for the secrets he had kept from her, but for everything he had done to hurt her and so many others. With the encrypted letter still fresh in her mind, Chloe took a deep breath and prepared herself for what was to come. She couldn't let her emotions cloud her judgment. The game had just changed, and now, Chloe Anderson was playing for keeps. Chloe spent the following days piecing together the fragmented information she had gathered. The encrypted letter had led her down a dark and complicated path, one that would test her patience and her resolve. She had started to look at the people Matthew associated with, examining his business dealings, and she quickly realized that his web of connections extended far beyond what she had ever imagined. Matthew had always been ambitious, but what Chloe had uncovered was something more sinister. The deeper she dug, the more she began to see how the deals he was making were linked to questionable activities. Chloe knew that this wasn't just about business, it was about power, influence, and money. She had never imagined that the man she had once called her husband could be involved in something like this. But as the pieces fell into place, she couldn't ignore the signs. The encrypted message had been the first key, but it was the web of associations that followed that began to paint a clearer picture. Chloe knew that she had to act quickly. Matthew wasn't just some businessman with a few shady deals, he was involved with a powerful group whose reach extended beyond their city, and they wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone who stood in their way. Chloe had always known that Matthew was capable of deception, but this was different. This was a betrayal that ran deeper than anything she had ever anticipated. She couldn't just confront him, not yet. She needed more evidence, something that would be undeniable, something that would bring everything into the light. Over the next few days, Chloe focused all her energy on gathering more information. She reached out to her old contacts, people she had once trusted in the business world, and carefully began to piece together a story that was much larger than she had first realized. As she worked, the weight of the situation grew heavier. She could feel the pressure mounting as the stakes got higher. Matthew, oblivious to Chloe's growing suspicion, continued with his usual charade, maintaining the same confident, almost arrogant, attitude. But Chloe knew better than to let her guard down. The clock was ticking, and she could sense that time was running out. She needed to be smart, to outmaneuver him at every turn. Chloe's determination only grew stronger as she uncovered more secrets, more lies, and more shady dealings. She was no longer just trying to uncover Matthew's betrayal. She was building a case that would expose everything. The path ahead was uncertain, and Chloe knew the risks involved. But she couldn't stop now, not when the truth was so close. The pieces were almost in place, and soon, she would have everything she needed to bring Matthew to his knees. Chloe spent the next few days obsessing over the information she had gathered. The weight of the situation was heavy on her shoulders, and every moment spent researching and analyzing the data only seemed to add more pressure. Matthew's world, once seemingly flawless, was crumbling before her eyes, and she knew there was no turning back now. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that Matthew had been playing a dangerous game, one that involved not just shady business deals but also people with power and influence who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. Chloe's mind raced as she pieced together the final parts of the puzzle. The encrypted letter had been the key, but the deeper she dug, the more she realized just how intricate and far-reaching the network Matthew was involved in really was. She knew she had to be careful. Every move she made could trigger a chain of events she wasn't prepared for. But Chloe was no stranger to difficult situations. She had learned long ago how to navigate the complexities of the business world, how to outsmart people who thought they were invincible. Now, she was using everything she had learned to bring Matthew down. Chloe had already gathered the evidence she needed, but she knew she had to be methodical. Rushing in without a clear plan would only give Matthew the upper hand. She needed to stay focused, to keep her emotions in check, and most importantly, to outmaneuver him at every turn. As she reviewed the documents once again, a sense of determination washed over her. Chloe was no longer the woman who had once been blindsided by Matthew's charm and deceit. She was stronger, smarter, and more prepared than ever. Her eyes narrowed as she realized the next step in her plan. She needed to confront Matthew, but on her terms, not his. Chloe carefully crafted her approach, knowing that she couldn't let him see her coming. It was time to play her cards carefully, to use the information she had uncovered to expose him for who he really was. The next day, Chloe arranged a meeting with Matthew under the guise of discussing business. She knew he would never suspect that she had already unraveled his web of lies. When they met, Matthew greeted her with that same smug smile, the one that always made her feel like she was the one being judged. But Chloe wasn't intimidated anymore. "Matthew," Chloe began, her voice steady, "I've been doing some thinking about our past, and about the business. I think it's time we talked about some things that have been left unsaid." Matthew raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but not yet suspicious. "I'm listening," he said, leaning back in his chair. Chloe's heart pounded, but she didn't let it show. She had everything she needed to take him down. It was only a matter of time before Matthew's carefully constructed world would come crashing down around him. Chloe kept her composure as she looked Matthew in the eye, his smirk still hanging on his face, seemingly unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. She could tell he thought this conversation would be just another one of his easy victories. But this time, things were different. She had the upper hand, and Matthew had no idea. "You've been busy, haven't you, Matthew?" Chloe said, her voice calm but carrying a hint of something darker beneath it. Matthew's eyes flickered, but he quickly regained his confident posture. "I don't know what you mean," he replied, his tone smooth and collected. "I've been working, just like always." Chloe knew she couldn't jump right into the accusations. She needed to play it cool, to make him believe she was still the same woman he had once controlled. "I've been doing some research," Chloe continued, her gaze unwavering. "And some of the things I've uncovered are surprising." Matthew's demeanor didn't change, but Chloe could see a slight tension in his jaw. He was starting to realize that she wasn't going to let this go easily. She leaned forward slightly, watching his reaction closely. "You know, Matthew, when we were married, I never really understood all the deals you were making, the people you were working with. But now that I've had the time to look into it..." Chloe let her words trail off, letting the silence hang between them. Matthew's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. Chloe felt a surge of confidence. She was getting to him, and he knew it. "It's funny," Chloe said softly, "how certain people can hide things for so long, only to have them come to light when they least expect it." She paused, letting the tension grow. "I found out about your little side project, Matthew. The one you've been trying to keep hidden. I know all about the deals you've been making, the ones that could ruin everything you've worked for." Matthew's face hardened, but Chloe could tell he was fighting to keep his cool. He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "Chloe, whatever you think you know, it's not what it seems. You're jumping to conclusions." Chloe smiled, knowing he was getting defensive. She had him right where she wanted him. "I don't think so. I've seen the documents, Matthew. I know who you've been talking to, and I know what they've been promising you." She paused, watching him carefully. "You've been involved in things that could bring down everything you've built. Do you really think you can get away with it?" For a moment, Matthew said nothing. The silence stretched on, and Chloe could feel the tension thickening. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. "You don't know what you're talking about, Chloe. Stay out of it." But Chloe wasn't intimidated. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about justice. It was about exposing the man who had betrayed her, the man who had built his empire on lies. She wasn't going to let him get away with it. "I'm not going anywhere," Chloe said firmly. "And I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. It's time for you to answer for what you've done." Matthew's eyes flashed with anger, but Chloe didn't flinch. She was ready for whatever he threw her way. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Chloe stood up from the table, her heart pounding, but her resolve stronger than ever. She had taken the first step in taking Matthew down, and she wasn't about to stop now. Chloe walked out of the conference room, her steps deliberate and strong. Her heart pounded, but her mind was clearer than ever. She had faced Matthew head-on, and for the first time in a long while, she felt in control. The weight of his deceit was no longer something she was carrying alone. She had the upper hand, and now it was time to make sure he knew it. Outside, the afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Chloe leaned against her car, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She had done it. She had exposed Matthew's secrets, at least the ones she could confirm for now. But this was just the beginning. She couldn't afford to stop here. There was still so much more to uncover. Chloe knew that Matthew wouldn't take this lying down. He was dangerous when cornered, and she needed to be prepared for whatever he might do next. The world he had built for himself was fragile, and the truth she held in her hands was a threat to everything he had carefully crafted. But Chloe wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was no longer the woman who had stood by his side, believing his lies and false promises. She had been betrayed, but now she was the one in control. As Chloe sat in her car, the reality of her situation began to sink in. She had taken the first step in a dangerous game, but it wasn't over yet. Matthew would fight back, and Chloe knew she had to stay 2 steps ahead. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had her own resources, her own connections, and she was willing to use them. The next few days were a whirlwind of phone calls, meetings, and digging into the deeper layers of Matthew's empire. Chloe reached out to people from her past, people she had once trusted, but now they were her allies in a war for the truth. Each piece of the puzzle she uncovered only solidified her resolve. Matthew's connections ran deep, but they were not invincible. There were cracks, and Chloe was going to expose them. She began to formulate a plan, one that would hit Matthew where it hurt the most, his reputation. He had built his name and his fortune on lies, but now those lies were coming to the surface. Chloe wasn't going to stop until she had exposed everything. The more she uncovered, the more she realized just how much power Matthew had amassed, but it also became clear how fragile that power really was. Chloe had the pieces she needed, and now she was ready to put them all together. It was no longer about revenge. It was about justice. Chloe was determined to see this through, to make sure Matthew paid for the years of deceit and manipulation. As the days passed, Chloe's confidence grew. She knew she was getting closer to the truth, and nothing, not even Matthew's best efforts, was going to stop her now. Chloe knew she was getting closer to the endgame. The truth was within reach, and she wasn't about to let anything stand in her way. The past few weeks had been a blur of research, phone calls, and meetings, each one getting her a little bit closer to exposing everything Matthew had tried to hide. As the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, Chloe could feel the pressure mounting. The deeper she dug, the more she uncovered, and with each new discovery, she could see Matthew's world begin to unravel. She was no longer playing defense. Chloe was on the offense now, using everything she had learned to take him down. Her plan was simple: expose Matthew's involvement with the shady deals he had been making, tear down the empire he had built on lies, and make sure the world knew the truth. Chloe knew it wasn't going to be easy. Matthew was powerful, and he had a way of manipulating people to do his bidding. But Chloe wasn't afraid of him anymore. She had seen his true face, and she wasn't going to back down. With her evidence in hand, Chloe began to reach out to the media, to trusted reporters who would be able to break the story wide open. She carefully chose who she spoke to, knowing that any wrong move could jeopardize everything she had worked for. As the days went by, Chloe could feel the tension building. Every phone call, every email, was one step closer to taking Matthew down. But Chloe also knew that he wouldn't go down without a fight. She couldn't afford to be careless. Matthew would do whatever it took to protect his name, to keep his empire intact. But Chloe had already prepared for that. She had anticipated his every move and was ready to counter it. The more Chloe thought about it, the more she realized just how much Matthew had underestimated her. He had always seen her as the weaker one, the one who was easily manipulated, but now she was the one with all the power. She had the truth on her side, and that was something Matthew could never escape. It was time for Chloe to act. She knew it was now or never. The story was ready to be told, and Matthew's secrets were about to be exposed to the world. Chloe could feel the weight of the moment, but she didn't hesitate. She made the call to the reporter she had been in contact with for weeks. "It's time," she said, her voice steady and confident. The reporter agreed to meet her the next day. Chloe hung up, her heart racing. This was it. She had done everything she could to gather the evidence, and now it was time to let the world see Matthew for who he truly was. The truth was no longer something she was holding on to alone. It was time for justice. The next day, Chloe met with the reporter. She handed over the files she had painstakingly gathered, documents, emails, everything that tied Matthew to the illegal dealings he had been involved in. She could see the reporter's eyes widen as they looked over the materials. Chloe knew that once the story broke, everything would change. Matthew's empire would crumble, and his carefully constructed facade would be torn apart. Chloe couldn't wait to see the look on his face when he realized that his secrets were no longer safe. Chloe paced back and forth in her apartment, the weight of the situation bearing down on her. She had done everything she could. The reporter had the story, and the evidence was irrefutable. The truth about Matthew's shady dealings was finally going to be exposed to the world. Yet as the hours passed, Chloe couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She had spent so long waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to expect. Would the media respond as she hoped? Would Matthew retaliate? Chloe knew she was about to face a storm. As she sat down at her desk, she stared at her phone. Her hands hovered over the device as she debated whether to check the news. Part of her wanted to wait, to let the reporter do their job. But another part of her wanted to see the impact, to see the world react to the truth that had been hidden for so long. Finally, she couldn't resist. She opened her news app and began scrolling. The headlines were everywhere. Matthew's name was plastered across every major outlet, and the words that followed sent a chill through Chloe's spine. Business tycoon exposed in massive corruption scandal. It was happening. The story was live. Chloe leaned back in her chair, trying to take it all in. She had been waiting for this day for so long, but now that it was here, she couldn't help but feel a sense of disbelief. For years, Matthew had controlled everything around him, his empire, his reputation, his secrets. And now, in a matter of hours, it was all coming undone. Chloe knew Matthew would fight back, but she didn't expect him to be as quick to react as he was. Her phone rang, the caller ID displaying an unfamiliar number. Her heart skipped a beat, and she hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello?" she said, her voice steady but cautious. "Chloe." Matthew's voice came through the phone, cool and calm, but she could hear the underlying tension. "You think this is over? You think you can destroy everything I've built with a few lies?" Chloe didn't flinch. She had expected this call. "I'm not the one who's been lying, Matthew," she replied, her voice firm. "You made your own choices. Now the truth is out." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and Chloe could almost hear Matthew weighing his next words carefully. "You'll regret this," he finally said, his voice low and menacing. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Chloe wasn't intimidated. "I think I've had a pretty good idea for a long time." "No," she said before ending the call. Chloe sat back in her chair, a sense of finality settling over her. The battle wasn't over, but she had won the first round. The truth was out, and Matthew's empire was crumbling. She wasn't sure how far this would go, but one thing was certain: Chloe had fought for her justice, and she was going to see this through to the end.